Welcome to today's deep dive. We're so glad you're here with us.
Absolutely glad to have you.
So, imagine this scenario for a second. You are packing up your entire life. You are crossing an ocean, leaving behind everything familiar, your friends, your career, your favorite coffee shop.
Everything.
Right. All to save a marriage that has been completely shattered by a devastating betrayal. You pour your life savings into this beautiful, isolated hillside villa in Spain, hoping the sunshine and the sea breeze will magically heal your broken trust.
It's a very romantic idea.
It is. You think you've finally found a sanctuary, a place where the world just can't reach you. But then, there's a knock at the door.
Yeah.
And you open it, only to invite your own destruction right into your living room. Okay, let's unpack this.
It is a scenario that taps into some of our most primal fears, isn't it? I mean, the idea that the ultimate threat isn't something lurking in the dark woods outside, but
Yes.
something you willingly invite across your own threshold.
Absolutely. Today, our source material is Robyn Harding's gripping psychological thriller, Strangers in the Villa. And our mission for this deep dive is to really get under the hood of this narrative.
There's a lot to get under.
Oh, for sure. We want to explore how physical isolation, profound grief, and long-buried But I don't want to just recount a story today. I want us to figure out why these characters make the choices they make.
What's fascinating here is that this narrative operates on multiple levels. On the surface, yes, it is a tense story about a home invasion.
Yeah.
But beneath that, it's a clinical masterclass in psychological warfare. It forces us to examine the inescapable nature of our past sins. You might be listening to this and asking yourself, why should I care about a fictional couple trying to grow grapes in Spain?
Right. What's the hook for you, the listener?
Well, because this deep dive forces us to ask deeply uncomfortable questions about human behavior. How well do you really know the people sleeping next to you? And is a truly fresh start ever actually possible, or do we just drag our demons to nicer locations?
That is exactly the question I want to answer today. So let's set the scene. We are in the beautiful, sun-drenched Costa Brava, specifically Catalonia, Spain. High up on Mount Pini, looking down over the picturesque, whitewashed town of Cadaqués and the sparkling Mediterranean Sea.
It sounds idyllic.
It's the kind of place you see on a luxury travel blog and just instantly feel jealous.
The setting is crucial because it represents the ultimate escape fantasy.
It really does. The real estate listing for this place was written by a chain-smoking realtor named Jose Sainz, and it essentially promises days full of joy.
Full of joy.
Right. It's a 1963 traditional Spanish villa. We're talking arched windows, original terracotta tiles, heavy wooden ceiling beams, and this beautiful kidney-shaped pool.
The whole package.
Yes, exactly. Curtis and Sydney, our central couple, buy this place. They completely uproot themselves. They quit their intense, high-stress jobs in New York, sell their apartment, and move here with this highly romanticized vision of planting Aran grapes and starting a boutique winery.
And they're utilizing something very specific to do this, the Spanish Golden Visa program.
Oh, right. Let's talk about that.
For those who might not be familiar with the intricacies of international immigration law, the Golden Visa program allows non-European Union citizens to essentially buy residency in Spain by investing a significant amount of money in real estate.
Which is usually around, what, €500,000?
Usually €500,000 or more, yes. So Curtis and Sydney aren't just taking a long vacation. They are legally, financially, and physically anchoring themselves to this new country to build a completely new existence.
But the stark reality of their day-to-day life is a massive, jarring contrast to that romantic real estate blurb. We find Sydney, who is definitely not full of joy.
Not at all.
Instead, she is sitting numbly by this unheated pool, shivering in her nightgown or a bathing suit cover-up. She allows herself exactly one yellow-filtered Chesterfield cigarette a day.
Just one.
Just one, dropping the butt into an empty jam jar. Her days are fueled by a low-dose antidepressant, and she's taking Ativan every single night just to get a few hours of sleep.
This brings us to a foundational psychological concept that we really need to dissect. What Curtis and Sydney are doing is engaging in what therapists and addiction specialists call the geographical cure.
I've heard that term thrown around, but what does it actually mean in practice? Because on paper, moving to a beautiful villa in Spain sounds like a pretty good cure for stress.
On paper, yes, but the geographical cure is the deeply flawed belief that changing your physical location will somehow alter your internal emotional state. It's the idea that your problems are tied to your zip code rather than your own brain chemistry, your habits, or your unhealed trauma. But neurologically speaking, it is a complete myth.
Really? A complete myth.
Completely. When you experience trauma, your brain's amygdala, the fear center, becomes hyperactive. Your cortisol levels, which regulate stress, get completely dysregulated. You develop neural pathways that are essentially deeply grooved loops of anxiety or grief.
Right, and you can't just leave those neural pathways at JFK Airport when you board your flight to Barcelona.
Exactly. Your brain travels with you. The Spanish sunshine doesn't rewire a traumatized nervous system. Sydney and Curtis are trying to outrun massive trauma. And it's not just one event.
No, it's a pileup.
It's two incredibly painful events that collided simultaneously. Sydney's mother, who was her absolute bedrock, her gravitational force in life, recently died of cancer. And right in the middle of that profound, earth-shattering grief, Curtis had an affair.
It's an interesting parallel to things we all do, right? On a much smaller scale, it's like when you are incredibly stressed at work and your life is a mess. So you go to an expensive stationery store and buy a $50 leather-bound planner.
I think we've all done that.
You convince yourself, this new planner is going to fix my chronic procrastination and make me an organized person. But a week later, the planner is empty and you're still procrastinating.
The external tool didn't change the internal habit.
Exactly. Curtis and Sydney just bought a €500,000 planner in the form of a Spanish villa.
That is a perfect analogy. And the stakes for them are incredibly high. Back in New York, Sydney was a public defender. That is a grueling, high-stress, emotionally draining job.
Super draining.
She is in her 40s, and the couple had struggled with infertility. They pursued expensive, exhausting medical options, riding that terrible roller coaster of hope and disappointment, and finally decided that their marriage, just the two of them, was enough.
Yeah, Curtis literally told her, we don't need kids to complete us, Sid. You and me together, we're still a family.
And then he takes a sledgehammer to that exact foundation.
Which brings us to the anatomy of this betrayal. I really want to dig into this because the sources include transcripts from their couples therapy sessions with Dr. Ellen Dwyer back in New York.
Those transcripts are very revealing.
They are. Curtis is a commercial leasing agent. His explanation for the affair is that they were short-staffed, he was under immense pressure, and he had just closed a massive leasing deal. He ended up drinking champagne and taking MDMA with a client named Colette Jasper.
Who's the COO of a biotech startup.
Right, so they are celebrating.
Let's look at the specific chemical and emotional cocktail involved there. MDMA, often known as ecstasy or Molly, is an empathogen. It causes a massive release of serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine in the brain.
So it's a very intense neurochemical flirt.
Exactly. It profoundly lowers inhibitions, increases feelings of closeness, and distorts emotional reality. So Curtis is drunk, high on a drug designed to manufacture artificial intimacy, and he sleeps with his client.
But here's the part that I find so fascinating and so backward. During those therapy sessions, Curtis claims to Dr. Dwyer that the affair was purely physical. He explicitly says, I felt nothing for her.
He says that a lot.
He clearly thinks this is his get-out-of-jail-free card. He thinks this defense mechanism minimizes his guilt. He's trying to say, look, it meant nothing, therefore my love for you, Sydney, is still the only thing that matters.
Which is a classic, though deeply misguided defense strategy for someone caught in infidelity.
Yeah.
But let's look at how that actually lands with the betrayed partner. From Sydney's perspective, this doesn't soften the blow.
No.
It magnifies it infinitely.
Right. I was reading that and thinking, wait, if he says it meant nothing, isn't that supposed to be comforting? But Sydney points out the absolute inverse. She says that if he had developed real, genuine feelings for Colette.
If he had fallen in love.
Exactly. If he fell in love, maybe she could at least comprehend why he risked their 12-year marriage. It would be a human failing.
Huh.
But to throw away 12 years of loyalty, especially right after her mother died, for nothing.
Just for a high.
Just because he was drunk and high and felt like it, that feels careless. It feels sociopathic in its lack of consideration. Exactly. It tells Sydney that her entire life, her marriage, her safety, was worth less than a fleeting, meaningless high. And because of this, Sydney is trapped in a loop of obsessive behavior.
The stalking.
Yes. Dr. Dwyer, their therapist, strongly advised Sydney not to ask for granular details about the affair. This is standard therapeutic advice to avoid creating vivid, traumatic mental movies that the betrayed partner will replay endlessly.
But Sydney cannot help herself.
She can't. The human brain craves information when it feels threatened. It wants to know the exact dimensions of the predator.
And she manifests this through intense digital stalking. Whenever Curtis leaves the villa in Spain to run errands, Sydney is immediately on her laptop. She is stalking Colette Jasper's Facebook page.
Even though the page is locked down?
Right, it's locked down for privacy, so Sydney can only see a few public profile pictures. But she memorizes every pixel of these photos. She zeroes in on a picture of Colette wearing these dangly earrings, drinking a pina colada at a tropical resort.
It becomes an obsession.
Sydney views Colette as projecting this vivacious, colorful, carefree energy, which makes Sydney, who is grieving and depressed, feel incredibly pale, aged, and inadequate.
That kind of comparison is a form of emotional self-harm. She is taking the little data she has and constructing a towering avatar of the other woman to torture herself with.
She even goes further. She looks up Colette's company, Anderson Technologies, the biotech startup she is supposedly the COO of. And Sydney discovers it's just a blank splash page on the internet that says, "Coming soon."
Just a splash page.
There are no dates, no team bios, no product details. Sydney, with her sharp lawyer brain, finds this incredibly suspicious for a company that was allegedly leasing prime commercial real estate in New York.
It is very suspicious.
But she pushes that suspicion aside. She suppresses her own instincts because she's trying so hard to forgive him, and she just wants the nightmare to be over.
And Curtis, on his end, is performing the role of the hyper-repentant husband. He is trying to literally feed the life back into his wife. He is cooking these elaborate, Instagram-worthy breakfasts, Spanish frittatas, pan con tomate, acting overly cheerful, constantly checking in on her.
But it's an artificial ecosystem.
It's fragile. The tension is thick enough to cut with a knife.
Okay, so that is the incredibly delicate, hyper-isolated environment we're dealing with. A shattered foundation wrapped in a beautiful Spanish facade. And right into the middle of this, the catalyst arrives.
The Trojan horse.
Yes. Let's talk about the arrival of Damien and Bianca. Sydney and Curtis are out by the pool trying to force this relaxation when they hear a light knock at the front door.
Which is alarming in itself.
Now keep in mind, they have absolutely no friends in Spain. They know no one. They live on an isolated hillside that is not easy to get to. Curtis's reaction is immediate and visceral.
He goes into defense mode.
He gets intensely defensive. His fists actually clench. His body language screams threat. But Sydney completely overrides him and goes to open the door.
Which we really need to pause and examine. Two strangers show up at an isolated villa, and Curtis's body is signaling extreme danger. Why on earth does Sydney ignore her husband's very rational fear and invite them in?
I was screaming at the source material. I'm thinking, you are miles from town, you have no security system, do not open that door.
It seems wildly irresponsible, but you have to view it through the lens of profound, prolonged loneliness. Sydney hasn't had normal, non-trauma-related human interaction in months.
And we need that interaction.
Humans are social creatures. Our brains literally require the dopamine hits of social connection to function properly. Prolonged isolation can actually suppress the amygdala's threat response because the craving for connection becomes overpowering.
Wow.
Sydney's desperation for outside stimulation simply eclipses her basic survival instincts.
So she opens the door, and standing there are a young, incredibly attractive couple. They're sweating, looking like tired, dusty backpackers. The woman, Bianca, steps forward to do the talking.
She takes the lead.
She has dark blonde hair, deeply tanned skin, a nose ring, 3 layered gold necklaces, and a very distinct Japanese symbol tattooed on her forearm. The man, Damien, is hanging back a bit. He's wearing a ball cap, pulling it low, but you can see he has these incredibly broad shoulders, prominent trap muscles, and what the sources describe as a very clear MMA bro aesthetic.
They look physically formidable.
Very formidable. They explain that their vehicle, a 1980s VW Westphalia van, broke down right at the edge of the property. They claim they are from Fremantle, Western Australia.
The accent is very convincing.
Very convincing. They say the fuel pump on the van is completely shot, their cell phones are dead, and they just need to use a wall outlet to charge up and figure out how to call a tow truck.
Very reasonable request on the surface.
Now, Curtis is hostile. He is practically radiating paranoia. He wants them off his driveway immediately. But Sydney steps in and invites them into the air-conditioned house. And the minute they cross the threshold, Bianca goes to work.
She wastes no time.
She immediately starts deploying charm. She admires the architecture of the house. She flatters Sydney's taste in decor, and then she drops this perfectly calibrated emotional bomb.
This is where we see the sophisticated mechanics of manipulation.
Right. Bianca somehow steers the conversation to family, and she casually mentions that her own mother died a couple of years ago from skin cancer.
Ooh.
Sydney, who is drowning in grief over her own mother's recent death, instantly latches onto this. They share this incredibly vulnerable moment right there in the living room. Bianca looks at Sydney and says, you know, When you lose your mom, you just feel adrift, like you're not really tethered to the world anymore.
It's exactly what Sydney needed to hear.
And Sydney is blown away. She feels like this complete stranger, this backpacker, understands the deepest hollows of her heart better than Curtis does.
Now, we often hear the term trauma bonding thrown around in pop culture to describe two people bonding over shared traumatic experiences. But I want to clarify something important here.
Yes, please do.
What Sydney and Bianca are doing is not trauma bonding. Bonding over shared trauma is just regular human empathy and connection. Actual trauma bonding is a clinical term that refers to the psychological attachment that a victim develops for their abuser through a cycle of abuse, devaluation, and intermittent positive reinforcement.
Ah, so it's a very specific cycle.
Yes. However, what is happening here is that Bianca is exploiting Sydney's trauma to manufacture instant trust.
It's terrifying how effective it is.
It is textbook predatory behavior, whether she's doing it consciously or instinctively. Predators possess a highly attuned radar for identifying vulnerabilities. When they see a crack in someone's armor, they don't attack the armor.
They pour themselves right into that crack.
Exactly. Bianca mirrors Sydney's deepest pain. And notice the dynamic this creates with Curtis. Curtis doesn't want them there. His instincts are screaming, but he won't kick them out because he is operating from a place of immense guilt over his affair.
Oh, because he owes her.
He is terrified that if he denies Sydney this one spark of joy, this one friend she's made, she will finally pack her bags and leave him. So the predators successfully use the couple's broken dynamic against them.
That is a brilliant point. Curtis is paralyzed by his own past sins, so he lets the wolves into the living room. So they all end up walking out to the road to help push this broken-down VW van into the driveway so it's not blocking the street.
A seemingly innocent activity.
And there is this terrifying high adrenaline moment. They're pushing this heavy 80s van up a slight incline, and suddenly it starts careening backward down the hill.
It's out of control.
Sydney has to throw her weight against it. Bianca is inside steering without a seatbelt, and Damien is screaming at the top of his lungs to pull the handbrake. It creates this massive rush of panic and adrenaline.
Which bonds them further.
They finally manage to stop it and secure it in the driveway. And because of that shared adrenaline spike, the ice is completely broken. Suddenly, they're all sitting on the terrace, drinking cold cava, eating a sprawling Spanish lunch together. The boundaries have completely dissolved.
But as they spend more time together, lounging by the pool over the next few days while waiting for van parts, the polite facade begins to slip.
The cracks start showing.
And we start to see the fundamental cracks in their worldviews. There is a deeply revealing scene by the pool between Sydney and Bianca that sets the stage for everything that follows.
I love this scene. Sydney is relaxing, feeling comfortable, and she reveals to Bianca that back in New York, she wasn't corporate counsel or a high-priced divorce lawyer. She was a public defender.
A massive distinction.
She represented marginalized people, people who couldn't afford a lawyer, and sometimes people who were accused of truly heinous, violent crimes. Bianca's reaction is not polite curiosity.
She is visibly shocked.
And outwardly disgusted. She looks at Sydney and bluntly asks why she would choose to spend her life defending bad people instead of helping good people.
Sydney's response is deeply principled, but it requires a bit of context for anyone who might not be familiar with the specifics of the American legal system. Sydney grounds her entire worldview in the Sixth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution.
Let's break that down for our global listeners. What exactly is the Sixth Amendment in this context?
The Sixth Amendment guarantees the rights of criminal defendants. It includes the right to a public trial without unnecessary delay, the right to a lawyer, the right to an impartial jury, and the right to know who your accusers are and the nature of the charges and evidence against you.
Crucially, it guarantees legal representation even if you cannot afford it.
Exactly. Sydney explains that she defends people because the awesome, crushing power of the state must be held to the highest possible standard of proof. If the state wants to take away a person's freedom or their life, they have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt against a vigorous defense.
Otherwise, innocent people get railroaded by a massive bureaucracy.
Yes, and the power imbalance is huge.
And Sydney brings up the National Registry of Exonerations to prove her point, right?
Yes. The registry is a database that tracks every known exoneration in the United States since 1989. It documents thousands of cases where people spent decades in prison or were even put on death row for crimes they did not commit.
Often due to faulty eyewitness testimony or coerced confessions.
Or prosecutorial misconduct. Sydney tells Bianca, look at the registry. The system is flawed. Therefore, everyone, no matter what they're accused of, deserves due process.
But Bianca completely rejects this nuanced systemic view. She introduces a terrifyingly rigid black and white morality. She looks at Sydney and asks, aren't there acts that are unforgivable, though? Even monsters.
This is the crux of the narrative. It is massive thematic foreshadowing.
Oh, absolutely.
Sydney believes deeply in due process, in the possibility of redemption, and in the idea that a person is more than the worst thing they have ever done. Bianca, on the other hand, clearly believes in absolute unforgiving punishment.
No gray areas for her.
None. In Bianca's eyes, if you commit a sin, you are permanently stained, and whatever vengeance comes your way is entirely justified.
And we are about to see exactly how Bianca and Damien apply that rigid, unforgiving morality.
Yeah.
Because they aren't just going to hang around the pool drinking kava. They're going to systematically dismantle Curtis and Sydney's reality, piece by piece.
It begins with what we can call the slow drip of psychological torture. They don't launch a frontal assault. They erode Curtis's sanity through plausible deniability.
Let's dive into the excursion to Port Elliot. The mechanic in Girona tells them it's going to take 10 days for the specific fuel pump relay for the VW van to arrive.
10 days is a long time.
A very long time. Sydney, who is now terrified of losing her new friends, insists they stay inside the guest room of the house instead of sweating out in the driveway in the broken van.
Curtis absolutely hates this idea.
Hates it, but again, his guilt silences him. So, to play the gracious hosts, they decide to take Damien and Bianca on a hike to a secluded beach cove near the town of Port Elliot.
Which is famous for being the home of the surrealist painter Salvador Dali.
The psychological warfare begins on the hike itself. The conversation turns to Dali and his wife, Gala. Bianca starts praising their notoriously unconventional relationship.
She knows exactly what she's doing here.
She talks loudly and admiringly about how Gala had numerous affairs and how Dali not only tolerated it, but encouraged it.
Yeah.
Bianca casually states that traditional monogamy is an unrealistic, outdated Disney version of romance, and that evolved, people understand that sex and love aren't always tied together.
Oh, wow. Talk about picking out a scab.
Right?
Exactly. She is subtly introducing the idea of infidelity not as a sin or a betrayal, but as a modern, evolved choice. It is a psychological needle inserted right into the absolute sorest, most infected part of Curtis and Sydney's marriage.
She's validating his cheating.
She is validating Curtis's actions while simultaneously making Sydney feel like her devastation is just old-fashioned and unevolved.
And then the emotional needles turn into literal ones. They arrive at this beautiful, secluded cove. The water is crystal clear, but it's teeming with these small, purplish jellyfish.
Beautiful but dangerous.
Curtis, who is a city guy, is naturally hesitant. He doesn't want to go in. But Damien and Bianca assure him with absolute unwavering confidence that these specific purple jellyfish are completely harmless.
They lie right to his face.
They tell him they had the exact same species back in Australia and that they don't sting at all. They basically imply he's being a coward. So Curtis takes his shirt off, wades into the Mediterranean, and dives in.
What follows is a visceral, terrifying scene of physical trauma.
Curtis breaks the surface of the water, and he is suddenly screaming in absolute agony. The jellyfish are not harmless. They're stinging him everywhere, his thigh, his ribs, his chest, his back.
The venom is highly potent.
He is thrashing fruitlessly in the water, the venom literally seeping into his bloodstream. He manages to stagger onto the rocky shore, and his skin is covered in these raised, angry red welts. He is dizzy, nauseated, and in blinding pain.
And how do our helpful Australian guests respond? This is where the mechanics of passive-aggressive abuse truly shine. Bianca says they need to scrape the stingers out of his skin to stop the envenomation.
Which sounds helpful on paper.
Yes, but then Damien and Bianca grab their stiff plastic credit cards and they aggressively begin scraping the venomous stingers out of Curtis's raw, inflamed flesh.
Curtis is wincing, swearing, his eyes are watering, and he is desperately trying not to cry in front of his wife and this hyper-masculine guest.
And while scraping him, Damien casually grabs Curtis's shorts and jokingly offers to urinate on Curtis's wounds, citing the old myth that urine neutralizes jellyfish stings.
I have to stop and ask, is there any world where Damien and Bianca genuinely made a mistake? Where they honestly thought the jellyfish were harmless?
To understand that, we have to look at the power dynamics of the interaction. In the realm of psychological abuse, plausible deniability is the abuser's best friend. Could they have made a mistake? Sure, theoretically.
but practically.
Look at the outcome. They have physically dominated Curtis. They have subjected him to immense, paralyzing physical pain. They have humiliated him in front of his wife by making him scream and stumble like a child.
It's totally degrading.
And crucially, they have masked all of this violence under the guise of helping him scrape the stingers out.
And they offer to pee on him.
That is a classic primal assertion of dominance. It degrades Curtis entirely. Imagine being in Curtis's shoes in that moment on the beach. You instinctively feel in your gut that you are being targeted, mocked, and emasculated.
But you can't say anything.
You can't get mad, you can't yell at them, because your abusers are perfectly disguised as apologetic, helpful guests who just made a silly geographical error about marine life. If Curtis gets angry, he looks like the unhinged, ungrateful jerk. It's a perfectly constructed double bind.
That makes my skin crawl. And the emasculation doesn't stay at the beach. It follows him right back to the villa. Curtis had this big romantic project planned. There's an old, derelict stone shed on the property, and his goal was to personally renovate it and convert it into a bespoke wine tasting room for their future vineyard.
A very ambitious project.
But Damien, who claims to be a commercial diver by trade, but says he grew up working construction with his dad in Australia, immediately inserts himself into the project. He takes over completely.
He knows all about structural integrity, load-bearing walls, replacing rotting timber.
We are seeing a very deliberate clash of class dynamics here. Curtis is a white-collar New York commercial leasing agent. His expertise is negotiating contracts in air-conditioned skyscrapers. He has absolutely no real hands-on blue-collar skills.
None.
He tries to act like he does, putting on a tool belt and trying to assert ownership over the project, but Damien effortlessly and constantly undermines him. Damien calls Curtis mate repeatedly, but he uses this specific, condescending inflection that borders on a sneer.
He is highlighting Curtis's physical inadequacies, making him look weak, soft, and useless in his own home.
It culminates in a really dangerous moment. Curtis is inside the dark shed, poking around, looking at the walls. Damien is up on the roof, supposedly assessing the shingles.
You're setting a trap.
Suddenly, there is a splintering snap, a violent crunch of wood, and Damien stomps an entire section of rotted shingles and timber right through the roof. Heavy debris crashes down into the shed, directly onto Curtis's head and shoulders.
It could have killed him.
Curtis screams again, stumbling out of the dust cloud. His arm is deeply scratched and bleeding. Damien rushes down from the roof, but instead of apologizing profusely, he instantly victim blames Curtis.
He tells Curtis he had no business skulking around inside an active construction site without a hard hat.
Notice the pattern. Physical injury, humiliation, and then blaming the victim while maintaining the facade of an accident.
Damien is systematically stripping away Curtis's physical safety and his authority as the man of the house. And while Damien is dismantling Curtis from the outside, Bianca is dismantling the marriage from the inside.
Yes. While the men are out at the shed, Sydney and Bianca are down in the basement of the villa, painting the walls this color called Chantilly cream. They are chatting, rolling paint, and Bianca casually drops an absolute poison pill into the conversation.
She knows exactly where to strike.
She turns to Sydney and tells her that she feels a little uncomfortable around Curtis because he's giving off a very strong, available energy. She implies heavily that Curtis has been staring at her body, checking her out when Sydney isn't looking.
We need to unpack how devastating that specific phrase, available energy, is to someone in Sydney's position.
Because it confirms her absolute worst nightmare. And it's not coming out of nowhere either. A few days prior, there was an incident that primed Sydney for this exact paranoia.
The pool incident.
Early one morning, Bianca came out to the pool area wearing only a tiny thong bikini bottom. She was completely topless, just sunbathing on the terrace. Curtis walked out, saw her, and instead of turning around and going back inside, he stayed and had a casual conversation with a topless 20-something woman.
Which is a huge boundary violation.
Sydney saw this from the window and confronted him. And Curtis immediately got defensive, telling Sydney that Europeans are relaxed about nudity and that she should just tell Bianca to put a shirt on if she was feeling so insecure.
So Curtis invalidated Sydney's entirely reasonable boundaries and framed her as the jealous, insecure wife. And Bianca knows this.
So she uses it.
So when Bianca paints the basement and says Curtis has available energy, she is weaponizing Sydney's existing trauma. She is triangulating the relationship. She is aligning herself with Sydney as the potential victim of Curtis's predatory gaze, forcing Sydney to view her own husband not as a partner trying to rebuild trust, but as an active, ongoing threat who hasn't changed at all since New York.
It's terrifying. They were turning husband and wife against each other while living under their roof. But as the tension inside the house reaches this suffocating boiling point, the outside world, the very things they crossed an ocean to escape, begins to aggressively close in on them.
The geographical cure officially fails. Their professional and personal pasts have tracked them down.
Let's start with Sydney's ghosts. She receives an unexpected phone call from Brian Hale, a former colleague back at the public defender's office in New York. Brian delivers horrific news.
It's a devastating call.
He tells Sydney that her former client, a young man named Jameson Drew, is dead. Now, Jameson Drew's case was incredibly complex. He was a man who choked his lover to death during an altercation, but he adamantly claimed it was an act of self-defense. Sydney was his assigned lawyer.
But at the time of his trial, Sydney was drowning. Her mother was dying of cancer, she had just discovered Curtis's affair, and she was emotionally shattered.
She didn't have the bandwidth.
She looked at the evidence, decided Jameson would almost certainly lose at trial and face life without parole, and heavily advised him to take a plea deal of 20 years to life.
It was a pragmatic legal decision, but one heavily influenced by her own emotional exhaustion. She didn't have the fight in her to take a difficult case to trial.
Exactly. But Jameson Drew couldn't handle the reality of maximum security prison. After just a short time inside, he committed suicide by slicing his own wrists with a sharpened toothbrush.
He left behind a suicide note, maintaining his absolute innocence, and explicitly blaming his lawyer, Sydney, for forcing him to plead guilty and not fighting for his chance to be heard in court.
That guilt is massive.
And to make matters worse, Brian tells Sydney that Jameson's grieving father, Teddy Drew, has been repeatedly calling the public defender's office. Teddy is unhinged with grief and is making vague but violent threats, saying he wants to find Sydney and make her pay for what happened to his son.
Consider the psychological weight of this for Sydney. She has dedicated her life to the Sixth Amendment, to the principle that everyone deserves a vigorous defense. And in her darkest personal moment, she compromised that principle, and a man died because of it. And now a grieving father is threatening vengeance.
Sydney is absolutely terrified. Her safe haven in Spain suddenly feels completely porous. She starts demanding that every door and window in the villa be deadbolted at night.
She's projecting the threat onto the house?
She is looking out at the dark hills, wondering if a grieving father from New York could somehow track her down in Catalonia. And I have a question about this. Does this intense external threat actually make her push Damien and Bianca away, or does it draw them closer?
Counterintuitively, it draws them much closer. In a state of heightened paranoia, the brain seeks immediate physical protection. Sydney looks at Curtis and sees a man who betrayed her, a man who gets crushed by roof shingles and stung by jellyfish. He doesn't project safety.
He projects weakness.
And then she looks at Damien, broad-shouldered, capable, aggressive. She views the Australians not as parasites, but as protectors. She actually insists they move out of the hot van and sleep inside the guest room of the house because she feels unnerved. She is literally seeking safety in the arms of the people who are meticulously dismantling her life.
Wow. That is so tragic. But Sydney isn't the only one hiding things. Curtis has his own massive secret. He has claimed to Dr. Dwyer and to Sydney that he is operating with absolute transparency now.
Total honesty, supposedly.
He gave Sydney all the passcodes to his phone, his email, his laptop. He swore there were no more lies, but that's not true. Curtis has a secret burner phone.
The burner phone changes everything.
He keeps it wrapped tightly in an oily rag, hidden behind some rusty tools in the derelict shed. When he drives into Girona to run errands for the house, he sneaks away, powers up the burner phone, and makes frantic calls back to New York.
He is calling his former business partner, Simon, and the transcripts of these calls are incredibly tense.
They are explosive. When Curtis finally gets Simon on the line, Simon doesn't say hello. He screams, "What the fuck have you done to me?"
A very telling greeting.
We learn that when Curtis was desperate to flee New York to save his marriage, he practically forced Simon to buy out his half of their commercial real estate company for pennies on the dollar. He needed liquid cash immediately.
But it is becoming terrifyingly clear that Curtis didn't just leave a company. He left behind a massive, ticking legal or financial time bomb, and Simon is the one holding it when it detonates.
The hypocrisy here is staggering. Curtis performs the role of the devoted, fully transparent, reformed husband, but he is maintaining an entirely separate, secret life of crisis management.
And this culture of secrecy paralyzes him when a genuine physical threat emerges on his own property.
Which brings us to the discovery by the oak tree. Damien leads Curtis to the far edge of the property line, near a massive, ancient, evergreen oak tree. The grass here is tall and dry.
The perfect place to hide something.
Damien points to the ground and shows Curtis a scattering of cigarette butts. Now, Sydney smokes yellow-filtered Chesterfields. These butts are white-filtered. Someone else has been standing there, watching the house.
That escalates the tension instantly.
And hidden nearby in the dry grass, they find a pair of heavy leather work gloves and a rusted, lethal-looking machete.
A literal weapon, staged just out of sight of their living room windows.
Damien immediately brushes it off. He acts completely unfazed. He tells Curtis it probably belongs to a neighboring farmer who is clearing brush, and that he will walk over to the neighboring property and return it.
Sydney, of course, is plunged into absolute panic.
She is convinced that Teddy Drew, the grieving father, has found them and is stalking them with a machete. Damien later returns to the house, smiling, and says he found the farmer, returned the tools, and everything is perfectly fine. It was just a misunderstanding.
But Curtis knows it's a lie.
Exactly. Curtis's paranoia gets the better of him. Later that day, while Damien and Bianca are lounging by the pool, Curtis sneaks over to their locked VW van in the driveway.
Taking matters into his own hands?
He uses a wire coat hanger to slip past the rubber window seal and unlock the door. He searches the van, and, hidden under a stack of plastic storage bins in the back, he finds the leather gloves and the machete.
The proof is right there.
Damien never went to a farmer. The weapon belongs to Damien, and he hid it on the property to terrorize them.
And this is where the paralysis of mutual secrets truly traps Curtis. He now has definitive proof that these guests are incredibly dangerous, manipulative liars who are hiding weapons.
The logical move is to call the cops.
The logical move is to immediately call the Spanish police or violently throw them out. But he can't. Why? Because to expose Damien, Curtis has to admit to Sydney that he was secretly picking the lock and searching their guest's van like a paranoid lunatic.
She would flip out.
He knows Sydney will view this as erratic, untrustworthy behavior, and it will confirm Bianca's narrative that Curtis is unhinged. Curtis is trapped in a prison of his own past transgressions. He has lost the moral authority to protect his own home.
The simmering paranoia, the hidden agendas, the sexual tension, it all finally boils over into absolute chaos. We have reached the climax of the story. The trap snaps shut, and it happens during a night of excess down in the town of Cadaqués.
Curtis decides he needs more time alone in the house to thoroughly search their guest room for clues. So he claims he has severe food poisoning from a seafood risotto Damien cooked earlier.
He tells Sydney, Bianca, and Damien to go out and enjoy the town without him,
leaving Sydney alone with them.
So Sydney, Bianca, and Damien take a taxi down the winding mountain road into Cadaqués. They start at a breezy beachside bar drinking massive goblets of strong Spanish gin and tonics. Bianca is relentlessly working her manipulations.
She is telling Sydney that she deserves to let loose, that she has been a saint for putting up with Curtis, and hinting that Sydney should maybe even the score to take her power back.
Sydney is highly vulnerable here. She is fueled by strong alcohol, which dramatically lowers her inhibitions, and her mind is swimming with the toxic seeds Bianca planted about Curtis's available energy.
She wants to feel desired, not pitied. She wants to feel alive.
They leave the beach bar and go to a dank, sweaty, intensely loud, strobe-lit nightclub hidden in the narrow streets of the town. The music is pulsing. Sydney is dancing hard, sweating, losing herself in the rhythm, feeling genuinely sexy and free for the first time since her mother died. And this is when Bianca executes a flawless tactical strike.
Paint the picture for us. What exactly happens on the dance floor?
Bianca dances close to Sydney, leans in, and suddenly kisses her, full on the mouth. And Sydney, who is confused, heavily intoxicated, and emotionally starved, kisses her back.
And Damien.
Then Damien steps out of the crowd. He steps right up behind Sydney, wrapping his massive, muscular arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him, and he starts kissing her neck while she is kissing Bianca.
It's a complete sensory overload.
It is this intense, dizzying, drug and alcohol-fueled physical entanglement. It's overwhelming. And then Sydney slowly opens her eyes.
And who does she see?
Standing at the absolute edge of the strobe-lit dance floor, completely still amid the chaos, is Curtis. He had hiked miles down the dark mountain road to secretly check on them, and he is standing there, watching his wife kiss their female guest, while being intimately held by their male guest.
A tactical brilliance of Bianca's move in this moment is absolutely stunning. Think about her goal. She doesn't just want to hurt Curtis physically with roof shingles and jellyfish venom.
She wants to break him.
She wants to obliterate his reality. She wants to destroy his marriage right in front of his eyes. She forces him to stand in the dark and watch his wife choose someone else, forcing him to feel the exact searing pain of betrayal that he inflicted on Sydney back in New York.
I have to ask, though, from a psychological standpoint, why did Sydney kiss her back? Was she genuinely attracted to Bianca? Was it just alcohol-fueled rebellion? Or was there a subconscious, darker desire to punish Curtis for what he did with Colette Jasper?
It is almost certainly a messy, complex combination of all three. Human desire is rarely simple, especially when tangled with grief and betrayal. The alcohol lowered her defenses. The attention made her feel visible and desirable after months of feeling inadequate.
And the revenge aspect.
Deep in her subconscious, the opportunity to finally balance the scales of pain in the marriage was likely irresistible. But regardless of the motive, the damage is catastrophic.
Curtis doesn't cause a scene in the club. He silently walks out. Eventually, he drives a drunken, stammering, deeply confused Sydney back up the mountain. He puts her to bed. He doesn't yell, but he is seething with a cold, absolute rage.
The quiet anger is the worst kind.
The next morning, when Sydney is hungover, sick, and deeply asleep in the bedroom, Curtis marches out to the driveway. He stands by the VW van, waiting for Damien.
This is the moment of confrontation. The masks are about to drop.
Okay, so what does this all mean? Damien steps out of the van, looking sleepy and relaxed. Curtis draws a line in the sand. He aggressively demands that Damien and Bianca pack their bags immediately, call a tow truck for their broken van, and get the hell off his property.
He says the hospitality is over.
Curtis expects Damien to finally cower, to act apologetic or defensive. But Damien doesn't react like a guilty houseguest. He just stares at Curtis and smiles this incredibly slow, chilling smile. And then his voice completely changes.
This is the turning point.
He drops the broad Australian accent entirely. Every trace of the G'day mate persona vanishes. He speaks in a flat, cold, distinctly American voice.
I want the listener to really imagine the shock value of that accent drop. The cognitive dissonance must be deafening for Curtis. It is the exact moment the power dynamic violently and irrevocably shifts.
Game over.
Curtis realizes with sickening clarity that he isn't dealing with a couple of annoying, overstepping backpackers. He is trapped on an isolated Spanish hillside with highly prepared, sophisticated extortionists who have been running a psychological operation on him from the moment they knocked on his door.
Damien looks at Curtis, speaking in this flat American accent, and says, "We're not going anywhere, buddy. Let's just say we have a mutual friend." Damien casually informs Curtis that a woman is dead and it is entirely Curtis's fault.
And then he drops the hammer.
Damien demands $5 million paid via untraceable cryptocurrency within exactly 1 week. If Curtis fails to pay, Damien will release a highly damaging video. A video that proves Curtis is responsible for this woman's death.
He promises to send the video to Sydney, to Curtis's family, to the New York police, and to every single one of his business associates.
Curtis doesn't ask who the woman is. He doesn't demand proof. He just goes completely pale, his skin turning waxy with terror. Because Curtis knows exactly what he did back in New York. He knows exactly why his business partner Simon was screaming at him on the burner phone.
He knows he is caught. But how did we get here? To truly understand how Damien and Bianca transformed from normal people into these perfect, ruthless predators who can pull off a transatlantic extortion plot, we have to look back at where they came from.
We have to examine the architects of vengeance.
This is perhaps the most crucial part of the psychological puzzle, because nobody wakes up one day and successfully executes a multi-million-dollar international extortion ring with flawless fake accents and psychological warfare. That requires a very specific, very damaged origin story.
So we find out they are not from Fremantle, Australia. Let's travel back to a struggling Rust Belt town in Indiana. This is the true genesis of Damien and Bianca. Damien's story starts in Washington State, where he was a teenager with serious anger issues.
He was expelled from school for violently fracturing another kid's eye socket in a fight. Because his mother couldn't handle him, he was shipped off to Indiana to live with his father, Ron.
Now, Ron is not a disciplinarian. Ron is a toxic, low-level scammer and a grifter. He teaches Damien that the world is entirely transactional. Ron gets Damien a job caddying and waiting tables at a high-end, exclusive local golf club.
And Damien, who is incredibly sharp and highly observant, watches these wealthy, entitled, often drunken members. He realizes how easy it is to take advantage of them.
He learns to quietly skim their credit card numbers, using a small card reader to steal thousands of dollars, filtering the money into a secret escape account, dreaming of one day moving to Europe.
This specific background brings up a fascinating psychological debate regarding sociopathy versus environmental conditioning. Is Damien fundamentally incapable of empathy, or was he taught that empathy is a weakness?
Under his father's tutelage, Damien adopts a worldview where he is an exceptional predator trapped in a mediocre world. He views the wealthy members of the golf club not as victims, but as marks who deserve to be separated from their money because they are careless.
He rationalizes his theft as a natural rebalancing of power.
And it's in this town that he meets Bianca. Bianca's backstory is even darker. She is working at a greasy local chicken shack trying to save money. She is tough, deeply aloof, and incredibly damaged.
Her father completely abandoned her when she was young.
And she lives with her mother, Yvonne, who's described as a malignant, toxic narcissist. The only source of light and genuine love in Bianca's entire existence is her young half-sister, a little girl named Lyric.
But here is the horrifying core of Bianca's trauma. Lyric's father, a decent man named Daryl, realized how toxic Yvonne was. He went to court and successfully won full custody of Lyric to protect her from Yvonne's abuse.
Yvonne was furious. She looked Bianca in the eye and swore she would get Lyric back, even if she had to kill Daryl to do it.
And this wasn't an empty threat.
It wasn't. Shortly after, Daryl dies in a highly suspicious, completely unexplained car crash. His car just suddenly veered off a straight road in the middle of the night and hit a tree.
The police rule it an accident, but there were signs of tampering. Yvonne immediately gets custody of Lyric back. She is so thrilled she actually throws a party.
So Bianca grows up with this inescapable, indisputable fact ringing in her head. Her mother is a murderer. Her mother murdered an innocent man to get what she wanted, and she faced absolutely no consequences for it. The justice system, nothing.
Think about what that does to a developing brain's understanding of morality and justice. If Sydney's worldview was shaped by the ideals of the Sixth Amendment and a flawed but necessary legal system, Bianca's worldview was forged in a crucible where power and violence are the only currencies that matter.
If her mother can commit murder and win, then the concepts of fairness or good karma are just fairy tales for weak people.
Exactly. So when Damien and Bianca find each other, they aren't just high school sweethearts awkwardly going to prom. They recognize the darkness in each other. They are trauma-bonded survivors of toxic parents.
Together, they solidify this terrifying philosophy. The world is a dark, brutal place cleanly divided into predators and prey. And they absolutely refuse to be prey.
They have no illusions about justice. They believe you have to take what you want by force or by fraud before someone else takes it from you.
Which perfectly explains the chilling logistics of the long con they pulled on Curtis and Sydney. This entire operation was a masterpiece of predatory planning.
It really was. Once you know their origins, you look back at everything that happened in Spain and see the strings, the Australian accent. Damien meticulously copied it from a guy he roomed with for a few months. It was a flawless cover identity.
The broken van.
Yeah.
They intentionally disabled the fuel pump relay themselves before pushing it up the driveway, ensuring they had a verifiable mechanical excuse to stay trapped on the property.
And their target wasn't random. They used sophisticated digital tracking to follow Curtis all the way from New York to a remote hillside in Catalonia. But what impresses me most, from a purely clinical standpoint, is their psychological profiling.
Yes. They didn't just break into a house, they broke into the deepest fault lines of a marriage.
Precisely. They studied Curtis and Sydney. They correctly deduced that Curtis was drowning in guilt and trying to play the perfect, accommodating husband to avoid a divorce. They profiled Sydney and recognized her desperate loneliness, her profound grief over her mother, and her bleeding heart empathy.
They completely weaponized Sydney's goodness. They knew she wouldn't let them sleep in a hot van. They knew she would invite them in.
And their ultimate goal wasn't just to extract $5 million in cryptocurrency and disappear. If they just wanted money, they could have sent an anonymous email with the blackmail video. But they didn't do that. They flew across an ocean, they lived in their house, they ate their food.
Because the money was only half the objective. The true target was Curtis's soul. Damien and Bianca wanted to execute a complete, systematic dismantling of his life.
They wanted to strip away his physical safety, his masculinity, his peace of mind. And ultimately, they wanted to orchestrate a scenario where they took away the one thing Curtis sacrificed his entire New York life to keep: his wife.
By seducing Sydney and making Curtis watch, they achieved total psychological annihilation. Because in their twisted worldview, shaped by abusive parents and violent trauma, they don't see themselves as villains.
They view themselves as arbiters of a dark, cosmic justice, Whatever Curtis did back in the States that resulted in a woman's death, Damien and Bianca are here to collect the debt in blood and sanity.
It is a claustrophobic, suffocating nightmare from start to finish. We've taken a massive journey today. We started with a desperate couple seeking a fresh start, trying to utilize a golden visa to buy their way out of trauma and infidelity.
And we ended up in a chilling, violent web of blackmail, hidden machetes, and the absolute certainty that past sins will always eventually arrive right at your front door to collect their due.
It's a heavy narrative, but a vital one to examine. And as we wrap up, I want to hand it over for a final provocative thought.
We all carry baggage from our pasts. None of us are spotless. We all have mistakes we've made, people we've hurt, secrets we've kept locked away in the dark corners of our minds. You might think you can outrun them. You might think crossing a border, changing your career, or starting a new life in a beautiful, sunny place will wash the slate clean. But your brain and your history travel with you. So ask yourself this uncomfortable question. If someone truly, deeply wanted to dismantle your life piece by piece, what secret of yours would they use as the crowbar? What vulnerability would they exploit? And look around. Who might be smiling at you right now, perfectly disguised as a friend in need?
What an incredibly chilling thought to end on. I'm going to be looking at everyone differently for a while. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and maybe, just maybe, double-check who you decide to invite into your home.